Welcome back to Tanya in 5. The last few days, we've been studying chapter 36. In chapter 35, we discussed this idea that true union with God only comes through the act of Torah and mitzvahs. Love of God, fear of God, still means some disconnect from God in that there is I who feel toward God. Whereas the act done through the body, in that act, considering that this is God's desire, there's absolute oneness and union with God. In chapter 36, the Alter Rebbe addresses the question of why the need to go through a union with God specifically in the body. Or another way of putting it is, what does God stand to gain out of it? What does God want with this? To answer that, the Alter Rebbe begins with thinking of what is the ultimate purpose for which God created the world at all. What did he want out of the project? So the Alter Rebbe says as follows. Let's think of it this way. God is infinite. He is everywhere. What's the difference between spiritual worlds and physical worlds? As we explained in previous chapters, the only question is, to what degree is each world conscious of godliness? In more spiritual worlds, in higher worlds, they are more conscious of godliness. And in our world, it is the most distant world in terms of being God conscious. A person can live in our world and completely deny God's reality. Now, if we were to assume that what God wants is heaven, and this world is to get to heaven, heaven being a place of spirituality and God consciousness, that, says the Alter Rebbe, falls short. Because the spiritual worlds, as lofty as they are not infinite. The definition of a world is that it's structured. Spiritual structure, but structure nonetheless. And infinite, of course, is structureless. It's just infinite. So even the loftiest of spiritual world isn't truly God himself. It's a very limited perspective of God in commensurate with the specific structure of that specific spiritual world. So the spiritual worlds, as lofty as they might be, are a descent and a limitation on God. If that's the case, then what's the purpose of all of creation? Well, the purpose therefore must be the limitation itself. The limitation, the concealment of God, is itself the purpose. If that's the case, then the purpose is the most limited and the most concealing world, our world. Because the spiritual worlds fail to truly convey God's infinitude, the purpose must therefore be in the concealment. Namely, in the place of concealment, our world, where God consciousness is at its all-time low. There we are to reveal the truth of God's infinite. That God is here even in the most dark and even in the most concealed of worlds. Even in a world which is physical, tangible, and the most limited you possibly can get with the least God consciousness whatsoever. That is where we're going to reveal God's essential infinite essence. Well, how can we reveal God's infinite essence? Aren't we not limited? And that, as we explained previously, is what Torah and mitzvahs are. Torah and mitzvahs, considering that they are God's will, God's desire, God's acts, God's ideas, they give us the strength and the ability to reveal the infinite truth of God here in this physical world. This ultimately is realized and experienced when Mashiach comes, which is the ultimate purpose for this entire project called creation. That we get to the point where this world experiences true God consciousness on its most infinite level. That is what the Messianic era is. The takeaway from all of this is, life is not about me, not about my spiritual advancement, not even about me getting to heaven. Because as great as that is, it's all limited and it's not truly what God wants. Life is fulfilling God's purpose. And God's purpose is in the act of physical mitzvahs done with the physical body, whether I experience it or not. Looking forward to seeing you when we conclude chapter 37.